Order, order. First of all, could I just say that welcome everyone who hasn't been here before to the House of Commons. This is the Education and Employment Subcommittee, which deals mainly with employment issues. And it was agreed that we would look at the strike that started off in June 1989 in the port of Liverpool, and we would give those involved, or the main proponents involved in it, the opportunity to come and present their case to this subcommittee. Can I just tell you what we are not, so that no one is under any illusions? We are not ACAS. We are not here to decide who's right and who's wrong. It's an opportunity for all the parties to present their case in whichever fashion they decide to present it. And we would certainly hope at the end to come to some conclusions, and we may even make some recommendations. But I stress again that everyone's here and they're able to say whatsoever they like, but it is your opportunity to present your side of this dispute in whichever fashion you would like to present it. Could I first of all thank all those who submitted written evidence. In particular, it's the first time I think I've had the opportunity of seeing the submission on behalf of the sacked Liverpool dock workers. Can I just say to them before they arrive at the table that prior to actually receiving your submission, along with other colleagues, I really wondered just what the dispute was about, because it was quite difficult with some of the sort of the ways in which you've been handling the dispute. It's been quite difficult for people to actually grasp this. I think you've set out, or whoever put it together for you has put together for you in a fashion which is easily digestible. Now, as I say, it's up to you how you develop that. Equally, can I thank both Torside and the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company for the evidence that they've given us as well. It's been a hard read, but it's been very informative. It would be our intention to give Torside 15 to 20 minutes, and you can use it any way you like. My colleagues will ask you questions, and if you feel that in presenting your response that you haven't said enough, or even when you're sitting in the audience and you're listening to someone else presenting their evidence, if you feel there are some things that you feel you need to correct, then please feel free to indicate that at the end of the evidence session to the clerk, Matthew Hamlin, and you can write to us then with additional evidence based on what you may or may not have heard people saying. First of all, could I welcome Mr. Bernard Bradley and Mr. James Bradley, and could you introduce the colleague who you have on your left-hand side, please? That's
my son, Francis Bradley. He's Francis Bradley.
Francis Bradley. Okay. Mr. Bradley, Senior.
Senior.
Mr. Bradley, Senior.
Joseph.
Joseph Bradley. Could you explain to us, as far as you see it, you've given us a brief outline in your paper. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that paper before my colleagues start asking questions?
And only just thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for the opportunity today. We did request to come here today because since the dispute started, we have kept ourselves quiet. We have been in touch with the official side of the union all this time. We haven't gone to the press or anyone else for that matter. A lot of what I've read in the press and heard is contradictory to what in fact took place. I'm here today, I would hope, to clear that position. I have nothing really to add to the written statement that I have given. Only to say that if we are looking for an end to this dispute, I think we've got to look back at the inauguration of Torside, because I feel that's where a lot of, why we're there has come about. You see, right through this strike and since this dispute, well, I would just say to the committee at this stage, so you will know where I'm speaking from. I'll give you a little bit of my own history. I was a Transport and General Workers steward, and I was on their district committee. Before that, I was a convener in Ford. My father was a docker, worked on the Liverpool docks and was injured on the docks. My other brother was a national officer, so I was from a trade union background. So a lot of what's transpired and been said since is not a factual case at all. and some of the things that have been in the paper. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, I was requested something like, prior to 91, I was on in another company following the abolition of the dock scheme, and I kept my ties with the union. And I'd been working on, I was on my own housing estate, and what transpired was that there were some people were not from Liverpool and they were doing all the building. And I went down to the union office and was talking to the officials down there and said, you know what, why haven't we got people in Liverpool doing this building? Why do people have to come to Manchester to do corporation work? And we were talking along them lines. So that developed from there. And the trade union side, nobody else, not the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company or anyone else, the trade union side was requesting me that to come down because with the ending of the dock bill, then the future as they saw it was in a state of flux and would change. Although they had maintained the status quo near enough at the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company, while outside everyone had gone casualisation, they had firmed up their agreements at the Mersey Dock and Harbour Board and had gone on. So in them terms, I was agreeing that I'd worked there, but there is the intention of Torside being formed was to stop any further casualisation. And that was the whole point of this exercise of Torside being formed. From there, after we had many discussions with the union, the district committee, all got the papers, we asked for permission to go and attempt to meet the people who worked around the port, not only in Liverpool, but Birkenhead and Garston. And we were successful in forming a business. But from that point on, we met up with resistance right up to the day of that strike. Now, that's the background.
Could you tell me, is Torside still in existence as a company?
Yes.
Do you still...
It's a non-trading position.
Non-trading.
It doesn't trade, but it's there because there's liabilities against it.
Right. Okay. Eddie?
Yes.
Eddie O'Hara.
Could I ask Mr. Bradley what connection Torside has with MDHC, or had with MDHC?
With the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company? None at all, only that we work on their docks. We work directly with the companies. We will invoice the companies that we work for.
What in essence would be the difference for a docker working for Torside as distinct from one working for MDHC? Conditions of service, contracts?
Well, our fellas got paid when they go to work. They would work all the time. You're not comparing apples with apples. What we had here is anybody who worked for Torside, whether they went to work or not, were fully paid.
And what about the conditions of service?
They got a day more than the dockers, 23 days holiday. We did talk to them about the pension scheme, and unfortunately, I know it's very humorous to some people, but when we talked to them about going along the pension scheme, Mr. Maxwell had some problems with the daily merit pension scheme, and they didn't feel at that time that the pension scheme with the company, as we were only a new company anyway, was the thing. And they would do their own private pensions and put the money on the rate.
Hourly rates of pay, overtime?
Pardon?
Hourly rates of pay and overtime, how do they compare with MDHC?
Honest, I'm not that conversant with what the dockers got, to be honest with you, but I heard it said, apart from, that our lads got more when they worked overtime, say they worked a Saturday and a Sunday, than in fact, because the dockers got other pay, you know, for different things. I'm not fluent with
Please understand, I'm not being hostile.
No, I know.
I'm trying to
myself,
tease out.
I would be, you know, the committee's too important for me to, you know, say something I'm not aware of.
No, I'm trying
we paid our people double time for all overtime.
Yeah. I'm just trying to tease out what is the objection to a Merseyside docker for working for Torside rather than working for MDHC?
Well, the reason for that is that the dockers themselves have always felt it's a threat for anybody. And it's history, it's not a new thing. This was a new thing, Torside coming in. What they felt, and general cargo was different than, say, the other work at Seaforth, and they tended to be in a fixed situation. Where we were, there was market forces closer, there was a difference. There was 2 levels of pay. We understood that, and we'd spoken to the union and the district committee before we come down, that there would be 2 levels of pay. But the pay had just gone up for the dockers because of the fact that the scheme had ended. You know, they got it. But our pay was compared. There's one other company on the docks, Nelson, who were working down there. They were on the same rate of pay. Ours was maybe a little, in places, a bit more.
But from MDHC point of view, for example, if you had to shed stuff, then that would be your problem.
Well, it'd be nothing to do with anybody, only us.
It wouldn't be MDHC's
it's our
problem.
business. Yeah.
Independent.
We're totally independent. We work outside of me. We work for P&O. We work for the...
This is Port of Charleston.
We work for other people, you know.
Perhaps as others ask, Chairman, I come back.
I'd just like to confirm, Mr. Bradley, the point which you make in evidence and which you've also made again today, and that is that given the background that you have in the port industry, as well as your contacts in the trade union movement, that the initial approaches were made to you by the Transport and General Workers Union and not by any other source.
That's true.
That's quite correct. Because much of what is taking place here has involved an unofficial dispute. And although the Transport and General Workers Union quite properly have been involved, particularly in the latter stages of trying to reach a solution, it is the very nature of the unofficial nature of this dispute which has caused much of the problem.
Yes, I would say that.
Thank you.
Can I ask, Chair, who trained the Torside workers when it was set up?
A company called Porsche Services.
Right.
They were owned by the dock company.
Right, so the people who worked for Torside were actually trained by a company that was owned by MDHC, is that correct?
No.
That is correct, but so were many others. So were many people.
Right.
Because there's nobody else who could train how to, to drive a harbourside crane. Where else do you go?
Right.
It's not something that's readily available only in the port.
Might help the committee at this stage if we pointed out that we paid for that training.
Yes, but you were saying they were trained by MDHC owned company. I mean,
Some weren't. We sent people down.
right, somewhere and somewhere.
To where was the place?
The National Sea Training College.
Right. So who owned the Torside company? Were the two of you the sole shareholders?
No.
Who else had shares in it?
A lad called Thomas Hendrick.
Right, but there was nobody from MDHC that had any shares in your company, so you were wholly separate as a company from MDHC.
But I'll say this is the biggest problem I've had, and I would like to put this to sleep because this is the one that the labour force of Torside has been attacked with, and that's why we've got the problem with we've got, and I mean attack. We've been told all along that we were a dock company, they're a dock company, you get them out of the road and the dock company will have to take you on. And I've been constantly getting that off these people. This is run from, I understand the reasons why because of my background, but that is run from the inauguration of Torside.
You see, in the submission on behalf of the sacked Liverpool dock workers, they've actually got Torside listed as an MDHC company. That's why I raised the matter.
That's just fiction.
Right, okay. Could you just help me on another matter as well? Why do you think that the 5 men walked off that job? It was in September last year.
Well, I have my own ideas why done, because we were in a spate of trouble at the time. We'd had 2 ships held up, you know, a few weeks before this, and we were getting a lot of trouble. You know, every time the men went out, we hose-piping the job. Most of the men stayed at work that day. There was something like 28 or something people, and 5 of them decided to go off the job, and that there was a problem. And incidentally, to the committee, I've never been asked from that day to this and given any representation on that by anybody, what in fact actually took place. But 3 weeks before that, we had a similar problem that I found out since. I didn't know till the next, well after this had happened, when I reported back to the office, but it was over. It was over overtime. But we had a situation where LCH had taken Nelson into a new place in Canada, and they were talking to them about certain things, and I don't know whether they, you know, because our position was, as Torside, if we left, whatever area we went in, we accepted them working conditions and what the situation was there. On this occasion, he said to our lads, normally they would get paid 5 hours in the morning on Sunday. If they worked past that, they would get another 5 hours. It would be 10 hours paid if they only worked 6. It came to a situation where the stewards come around to me and said, we're only getting paid 6 hours if we work them. I said, well, that's not my understanding. The agreement, you know, that I have with the people, I will honour that. We have no problems with that. So it's not a question that we've had for 5 years, or say 4.5 years since the company done, hundreds upon hundreds of people where we've had to go and sort the payout. Somebody over in Birkenhead's not going to pay him an hour because he wasn't here and that type of thing. And we have paid them. The problems can be sorted out. This was willful what happened that day.
Just one last thing then. You've described to Eddie that the conditions of work were good, and you say that the terms and conditions of employment were good. Could you help us then? I've read thoroughly the statement that you have made, which described labour relations from hell. I mean, this seems why were they so bad, do you think?
I'll get to that, but you have to tell me, so I can see. My history is Liverpool, and where I come from. I'm fighting for myself when I'm coming here today, for nobody else, only what I put into my life. And I'm 63 years of age, and I'm not going to be put in a position that I would have people sacked. A fortnight before this, my son, James, left Torside because I said no. Because of me, because people said, not having people going on strike. And he left the company because of the decision I'd taken. He said, I'm not going to allow any people to go on strike. And what's important with these, as I see it, what's the important thing is that we were never going to be allowed to go on because there was outside influences. We had an open office. People would come in and say, I've lent people 400, 500 pounds. One fella's going to take his baby to America, but no problems. This is a humane company I run. And help everybody, but what we ended up with, when he would go out and he would go to meetings outside of my jurisdiction or something, I lost them.
What were those outside influences you just mentioned?
I would say it was the poor stewards. Because I was that's what I was led to believe when other people would come back and say, you know, you're just a trainer, you're nothing.
Chairman, on page 8 of the shop stewards report, which is Port of Liverpool document 3, it's stated that Torside employ casual labour. Now, I imagine you would deny this.
Absolutely.
Could you comment on that, and could you perhaps include in your comment what you understand casual labour to mean?
I would imagine casual labour to have a no fixed employment, to be coming in and paid for that work performed, They're paid only for that work performed. We never employed a man in that calibre in my life, and not about to start. The position was that we spoke to the union for some time about how to attract more work because there was peaks and troughs. This was before this incident. It was something like 3 years ago. And we discussed it with the official side of the union, the stewards and everything. We said, look, there's no way we can take more people on full time. Because when there's no work in and we're paying people, you know, they're not working. So we got to a situation where we said we could afford to pay them for 20 hours a week. We give them 10 days holiday. We give them every facility. 11 days, sorry. Sound correct. And they would be fully employed. We would recruit from them people into full-time employment. I think we did about 10 or so people who come from part-time into full-time. Now, if you're asking me what casual labour is, I wouldn't attempt. It's money in your hand or something like that. It had been, and had been, it's used, I believe, all around Great Britain. You use it, but no better than me. But it's used in ports all over the country. And I think maybe that's what the stewards, you know, whatever really thought. But it's certainly not anything to do with Torside or any of them ideas to do with Torside. And I must say, in all fairness, in my experience as a steward and everything, it was never on the minds, to my knowledge, and was there ever an indication from the port employees that that's the way they wanted to go?
We don't have a copy of a Torside contract, but in Appendix 1 to the shop steward's submission, there's a PDP Services Limited contract, and there is a clause, the worker is not entitled to secure payment from the contractor for holidays or absence due to sickness until a 12-week period from signing has elapsed. No obligation on the contractor to provide the worker with a guaranteed number of working hours in any day or week, and the worker acknowledges that the nature of the contractor's business may mean that there will be periods when no work is available. How would Torside contract?
That's totally alien to what was on offer by us. I mean, you're speaking for another company.
No, I accept that.
No, well, the way we're different from us, we get 40 hours pay.
Well, you know, absolutely different. You know,
yeah.
Profound.
So,
there's contract you were on. If you never worked at all, you're going to get full pay, and you're going to get 23 days holiday. Yeah. And you're going to get all the time that they were working for Torside. Yeah. You're going to get, and there's no comparison.
The part-timers were paid 20 hours every single week that they worked.
So no obligation on the contractor to provide the worker with a guaranteed number of working hours. Not so.
Sorry.
Not so with Torside, that the contractor was not obliged to provide a guaranteed number of working hours.
We were obliged for 40 hours for full-timers and 20 hours for part-timers. And we're paid every week.
And with Torside, not the case that contractor's business may mean that there will be periods when no work is available.
Nonsense.
Our part-time also, if they worked overtime on a daily basis, they were paid that, aren't they?
Yeah. On top of the 20 hours?
On top of the 20 hours. So there was no, there was nothing on our part that we're in the field to go and milk human beings. I
might say all agreements were arranged and discussed and agreed with the Transport and General Workers Union.
Well, perhaps we'll get the opportunity to ask other witnesses, Chairman, what they mean by casualisation. But that's your comment on that anyway.
Mr. Bradley, thanks very much. We're going to have to bring this to a conclusion. Can I first of all thank you for coming? Can I just ask you one last question before you go? Did you believe that you established Torside with the acknowledgement and at least tacit support of the Transport and General Workers Union?
I wouldn't have done that any other way, Mr. Chairman. That's the only reason for me going down there.
So you believe when you established Torside that the Transport and General Workers Union...
The principle that was... Can I put it in a clear way? So, because this is what's hurting so much. We went down there to make sure that there would be no casualisation in the port of Liverpool, that we would employ full-time people. And that was why they went down there, and for no other reason.
Okay, as I say, can I once again thank you very much for coming here. If you'll be sent a transcript of the actual evidence taken, and if there's anything you want to add, if you send it in written form to the clerk, as I say, if you want to say, you're more than welcome to say. And if you hear anything that you disagree with or you think needs correcting, then we'd certainly welcome that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to stay. I'm going off. I'd like to say to very much to all the committee and people, what I've said is factual, and I don't see any reason to argue with anyone else.
Can I just say that in the union's evidence, you don't actually, there's only one line that actually explains anything about how the dispute started. When we were in negotiations before that, for many weeks, and it's what it doesn't say that, to me, that tells the story.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wardle.
Sir.
Welcome to the committee. You've heard what I said at the start. It's entirely, I appreciate that originally that we intended that you would give evidence after those involved directly in the strike, but we decided after further discussion that you should give your evidence first. We just thought it would be better that way. But you're certainly welcome to stay and listen to what they say. And again, the offer is open to you. Anything you hear that which you fundamentally disagree or you feel requires greater elucidation, if you can send it in written form to the clerk, we'd greatly appreciate that. Can you just, for the benefit of the stenographers and the record and my colleagues, introduce your colleagues on either side of you, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. On my left, Mr. Trevor Furlong, who's the Chief Executive of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. And on my right is Mr. Bernard Cliff, who's the Port Operations Director, Mr. Chairman.
Could I just also, before we begin, in the Financial Times today, there was a comment saying that you may be going to ACAS tomorrow. Could you tell us exactly who, as far as you understand it, will be at ACAS tomorrow, and the purpose of whoever's going to ACAS?
Our understanding, the fact of the matter is that this is an initiative by ACAS, Mr. Chairman, to attempt to resolve this dispute. And the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company will certainly be represented. As I understand it, there will be a member from the official executive of the Transport Workers and General Union, and there will also be representatives of the leaders of the unofficial dispute.
Okay. Can I again thank you for the written evidence that you submitted. I'm certainly not attempting to encourage you to say any more, because I think it would be more useful to try and have a dialogue and answer questions. But is there anything else, since you've submitted that you think would be important for the committee to know about before we begin the questions?
Well, I'd like to make three brief comments, Mr. Chairman. One, I think, which is maybe helpful to the committee, is to define exactly what the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company is. It is the Ports Authority, it is the landlord, and it is the operator of some berths in the ports of Liverpool. And those berths account for only 35% of the non-oil cargo. The two other things that I wanted to draw to the attention of the committee is two factual errors. One, we'd never made a bid for the Port of Medway in 1991, Mr. Chairman. That's a question of fact. And the second thing is, if I could, on page 15 of the shop steward's evidence, section 8 of the shop steward's evidence contains a number of, quite honestly, factual errors. And what I would like to do, Mr. Chairman, is to give a list of the factual position to the clerk so that she could circulate it to the members of the committee in due course.
Okay.
That's all I have to say, Mr. Chairman. We'll do our best to answer whatever questions you may have.
Okay. Could I perhaps start off the question by asking, as far as you're concerned, why do you think you're involved in this dispute?
Mr. Chairman, the origin of this dispute lies entirely in the dismissals at Torside, which is a company with which we have no connection, and that has remained the basic cause of the dispute throughout its length. If
that's correct, why is it then that you've been meeting with the Transport and General Workers Union? And it would seem to me, as coming from a trade union background myself, that you went a great distance to try and resolve the dispute, despite the fact of your earlier statement.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think we have to realise that what we certainly feel as a Mersey Docks and Harbour Company, that we have a responsibility to Liverpool and to Merseyside. And the second thing to bear in mind, and we bore two factors in mind, one which is quantifiable and the other which is unquantifiable, in attempting to resolve this dispute. The first thing, which is clearly quantifiable, is the length of service of those who were dismissed from the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. The great majority of those people have served a very long time, and we bore that in mind when we made our offers to settle the dispute. The second thing, which is much more difficult, Mr. Chairman, because the port has been operating normally after a lapse of 7 weeks and continues to do so to date, is the damage which it has done to the reputation of the Port of Liverpool and to Merseyside as a whole. Now that means both, Mr. Chairman, our ability to attract new business and to create jobs in Liverpool. I can't quantify that, but it is a real factor.
One last thing. When you took the decision to dismiss your own employees, particularly those who refused to cross the shoreside picket line, you made the point that some of those individuals had 40-year service.
How many, Mr. Chairman?
You said 30 and 40-year service.
A great number of them have over 25 years of service.
25-year service. As far as I understand it, the picket line was made up entirely of Torside employees at that time, and your employees refused to cross the picket line. Now, in the evidence that the sacked workers have submitted to the committee, they make a point which I think is reasonable, that some of those who crossed the picket line were the fathers and cousins, uncles, perhaps even grandfathers of some of those people who had less than 25-year service working for Torside standing on the picket line. I would have thought that was quite a human emotion for a parent not to walk past his son who he believed had been unjustly dealt with. Now, did the Transport and General Workers Union not suggest to you that those people, some of those 200 people or whatever the number was who refused to cross the picket line, may they not have crossed the picket line for that particular reason?
I wonder, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mr. Cliff, who was actually in the day-to-day front of the thing, if he could answer that question on our behalf.
Chairman, I would mention that, yes, there were perhaps 30, no more, certainly than 40 of the people employed by Torside who had relations working for Mersey Docks, and there were 329 who didn't cross the picket line. So I think that factor would have applied to a proportion, perhaps 10% of those who were affected. But what I would like to point out is that when the problem occurred in Torside and it became known that there was a dispute there, because of the background which you've heard from Mr. Bradley, it came as no surprise to us that Mersey Docks might become involved. And in fact, I had a meeting with one of our recognised negotiating committees concerning the container terminal on the Tuesday afternoon. The dispute started on the morning, and I took up the issue with the shop stewards there and the union official, the full-time union official who was present, and said I hoped that this would not affect Mersey Docks and Harbour Company, because as they knew very well, Torside was independent of Mersey Docks and we had no connection or responsibility for them. we had a discussion about that. On the Tuesday and the Wednesday, the Torside picket line didn't come up to the gates that were used by the employees of Mersey Docks that worked at the terminals of Mersey Docks. They came up on the Thursday, and as our evidence shows, it is known that this was after discussions with the Mersey Docks shop stewards. On that Thursday morning, I telephoned the regional office of the Transport and General Workers Union and spoke to, I got a message to Jack Adams, who was the acting regional secretary following the death of Bobby Owen early in August, and asked him to come over and see me because of the urgent and very difficult situation that had developed in the port, because the picket line had been set up outside of Mersey Docks gates that morning. And I advised him what we believed the problem was and what would have to happen if the people outside persisted with the picket line and persisted with the demand that Mersey Docks take the 80 Torside men into employment. And I asked him to go back and impress upon the unofficial leaders the seriousness of the situation, which I believe he did, and I think in his advice was dismissed. But those involved were well aware before the notices were issued for them to come to work and honour their contract of employment or face the prospect of dismissal. They were well aware of the seriousness with which the company viewed the situation.
Okay. Eddie?
Chairman, could I pursue that? And Mr. Worrell's comment earlier about the lengths that MDHC have gone to resolve the dispute. If I look at page 1 of the MDHC's own submission, Port of Liverpool document 2, the strike occurred on the 28th. On the 28th, you delivered letters by hand, presumably, to the homes of the men, ordering them to return to work by the 29th on pain of dismissal. On 29th, when they didn't, the following day, you dismissed them. On the 29th, you issued new contracts to nearly 200 of them, which is considerably less than the total. And you say the contracts are on the same terms and conditions. And I wonder whether that's disingenuous, because I have what alleges to be a statement of this contract, and it says, 1, personal contracts, the terms and conditions applicable to this position are agreed directly between the company and yourself. None are determined by collective agreement with any trade union. I wonder whether that is the same contract as the men had. But nevertheless, when these contracts were not returned and signed, then a week later, or was it 8 or 9 days later, you sacked the men. Now that doesn't look to me like going to enormous lengths to resolve the dispute. That looks to me like chopping the supports to the bridge to any resolution of the dispute as quick as could possibly legally be done. And I don't dispute that legally you were probably within your rights.
Chairman, I explained the early chronology, that it was the 26th when the Torside strike started, 28th when they moved the picket line up to Mersey Docks, and following discussions with the regional secretary of the union, the notices were issued. We had, as we've illustrated in the evidence that we've submitted, in the previous 18 months and in 1992 and earlier, major problems over similar issues. No one could have been unaware of what might develop from the actions that they took. And we felt that the core of this was a demand that Mersey Docks act as the employer of last resort, a term that would be familiar to those who know how the dock labour scheme used to operate before its abolition in 1989. That was a role that was being forced upon us that we found unacceptable. It has no equivalent in any other industry, and it has no place in any port, any other port in the UK today. There has been, it wasn't a case of chopping away at the supports. As long as that demand and that issue remained in place, and it remains in place today, the people, the unofficial leaders of this dispute have been unswerving impressing at that point that the 80 men employed by Torside must be taken on by Mersey Docks, and we are resolved that we will not accept that.
But nevertheless, Chairman, by the actions which I've described, any way to a solution was blocked off, and it was blocked off even further when you then took the action of employing as an agent Drake International to employ a replacement workforce on permanent contracts. So whoever, T&G or whoever, tried to negotiate with you a resolution to the dispute could not negotiate a resolution on the basis of the men having their jobs back, because you had contrived a situation swiftly and deliberately where the jobs no longer existed.
We didn't have the luxury of time. One of the companies that we serviced on a contract basis, we supplied them with labour, North Irish Ferries, cancelled their agreement immediately. The fierceness of competition in the ports industry, Mersey Docks is employed on the Irish Sea, we have terminals in Belfast and Dublin, and we operate the shipping line that runs between. If that line had stopped working for 2 or 3 days, it would have lost a significant amount of its business immediately. The recruitment was started immediately in that area in order to protect the business. So there was at least 60 jobs disappeared in effect within the first 2-3 days of that dispute commencing. We were aware, if I can return to the point, that the demand about Torside in effect made this insoluble, that as long as men would not come in to work and cross a picket line in support of that demand, we were likely to remain idle and our business would go elsewhere. We have 900, just over 900 other employees in Mersey Docks. We had to think about their future just as much as we had to think about the future of the position of the 329 men who were dismissed. Those 900 other employees have equally as long service, and given their have got long service with the company as well, and all 95% of them are members of the Transport and General Workers Union.
So there was no alternative to sacking the workforce within 24 hours?
Well, as I hope I've illustrated, it wasn't within 24 hours. There was an awareness well before the issue actually was created and forced upon us of what the likely outcome would be. And we feel, frankly, as a company, there were no other options. It was either take the action that we did or accept that the port would stand, or areas that were operated by Mersey Docks would stand idle for a considerable period of time.
One final question, Chairman. The option of the men returning to work and then negotiations taking place was not open, as far as you're concerned?
That was never presented to us. You referred to them coming back in. There was an unofficial meeting. And
it was on the 9th of October.
And we were informed that the men were coming in, including the Torside men, and that the reason that they were coming back in was to have a vote to go back on strike again. And that was no basis on which to try and resolve the matter or take matters forward.
Unless someone else wants to.
Could you just for the record, could you tell the committee how many persons are employed in what was normally regarded as dock work now on the day of the strike itself and now in Mersey Docks?
Well, what was regarded as dock work before the abolition of the dock labour scheme, there are many companies other than Mersey Docks who are engaged in that work. PowerGen, for example, have a terminal that they operate, that they've built, and they operate on their own behalf. That would have been classed as...
Well, just to simplify it, could you tell us how many dockers, in the term that you and I understand, dockers, were employed by Mersey Docks and Harbour Company on the day of the strike?
Right. On the day of the strike, of former registered dock workers, 258. 258.
How many are now employed in that capacity by Mersey Dock and Harbour Company?
About 60.
60. Sir Malcolm Starkey.
Just one point at this stage, Mr. Cliff. In your evidence a few moments ago, you said, and I quote you accurately, I think, when you were referring to the dispute at Torside, that it was no surprise to you that this would then move to Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. Why?
From a very early stage, it was apparent that the way that Torside was structured and operated was not acceptable to the organisation that calls themselves the Merseyside Port Shop Stewards Committee. And in fact, in 1991, Mersey Docks and Harbour Company recognised two individuals as conveners for Mersey Docks, the dockers employed at Mersey Docks operations. And because they used that position to go into the business of Torside, go into Torside, agitate within the company. After several warnings, we had to say to them, we cannot accept this any longer. We cannot give you a full-time role as an official to operate in this sort of way, and we withdrew recognition. Now, that was a very early piece of evidence of the interference in the internal workings of Torside that we made it clear was not acceptable to us. And as I think Mr. Bradley made it clear, that the aim was that the Torside, the people employed by Torside would not be acceptable to them unless they were employed on identical terms and conditions to those that applied in Mersey Docks.
Can I just ask you to, in referring to your own evidence, the summary of written evidence that you put before the committee in paragraph 12, again, it's really very much on the same subject. You referred to before the attempts that have been made as far as the reintroduction of practices, certain practices that prevailed before the abolition of the scheme were concerned. Could you, just for the benefit of members of the committee who may not be familiar with these, perhaps give us one or two? We recognise the fact that the port industry in this country has changed quite dramatically, as indeed it has in many other parts of the world.
Well, there was the major dispute in 1992, which I've referred to in some detail, so I won't go back over that, that certain work could only be performed by those who were considered to be registered dock workers and no one else. There were examples where we invested in state-of-the-art technology of mobile harbour cranes, where we wanted they were purchased to operate anywhere inside the port, and we wanted the people who operated that equipment to be capable both of maintaining and driving the equipment. And as a result, we had refusals to work with it because they were not driven by people who were formerly registered dock workers. I think as well what lies behind it, it's been touched upon about what is casual work and what isn't casual work, that unless there is a standard rate of pay and standard terms and conditions that apply throughout to people who are recognised as being an equivalent of former registered dock workers, it's casual work. Those are the sorts of issues that constantly recur.
One final point on this question of casual work. We've heard what Mr. Bradley had to say earlier on, and the fact that he believed that it was in the interests of the port as well as the workers themselves that a company like Torside should be set up in order to avoid casualisation. Is it your view, as the Mersey Docks Harbour Company, that the employment of casual labour in the sense that we have had it portrayed to us this afternoon is in the interests or not in the interests of the port? And would you say to us whether or not you feel that the sort of contract that was on offer by Torside, which gave a guaranteed working week for both full-time and part-time workers, is very much the sort of thing which is in the interest both of the port and of the employees who work within the port?
We judged as a company at the time of the abolition of the dock labour scheme that we didn't want to see the introduction of casual work into activities where we had any sort of involvement, and instigation of Torside, the introduction of Torside was a way of avoiding the introduction of casual work, and it can only be in the interests of all who wish that sort of development to be limited for the organisations such as Torside to be successful.
Mr. Chairman, could I add to that? The company has never employed casual labour until the start of this dispute. and has no intention of doing so once this dispute is settled. That is the purpose of the memorandum, to factually correct what is in the evidence of the shop stewards.
David Porter.
Tell us about your offer to end the dispute. How was that put to the men?
It was after a long and protracted negotiation with members of the National Executive of the Transport and General Workers Union, and it was put to the men by the representatives of the Transport and General Workers Union. It was subsequently turned down by a large majority in the ballot.
Who organised that ballot?
We had electoral reform. To repeat, the reason why we put this revised offer was a result of extremely protracted and lengthy negotiations with the official members of the National Executive of the Transport and General Workers Union, bearing in mind the two criteria which I have put forward. One, a recognition of the long service of the people involved, and secondly, the importance to the reputation and future business and employment of both the Port of Liverpool and Merseyside in general.
And do you know if anybody did accept it, or do you just know the final outcome?
Well, we can only assume that those who didn't vote against it were in favour of it.
David Jameson.
Could you just clarify something for us? Is Torside a subsidiary of MDHC?
No, sir.
Did you at any time encourage its establishment, or welcome even its establishment as a company?
Could I ask Mr. Furlong, Mr. Cliff, because I was not there at the time.
The Torside came about, insofar as we were involved with it, in discussions with the then district officer of the Transport and General Workers Union, Mr. Symes, about prospects of future employment, which came up from time to time in discussion with us. The possibility of companies requiring labour to deal with peaks of demand was discussed, and the risk of that being catered for by casual labour was discussed, and therefore the principle of a company such as Torside arose between us, and the union side encouraged and wished that to take place, and we said we would be happy with that. We would encourage it. It would be a way of avoiding casualisation. But we made it very clear that any company that operated in that way would stand on its own and would have to live or die by its success in providing the service that was required of it to the standard required.
Well, when you say casual labour, we've already defined that. What you're saying is you expected Torside not to employ casual labour, but perhaps flexible labour, people that could work in various different places as required.
Well, as Mersey Docks, we expect to employ flexible labour, not flexible labour, let alone Torside. But what we expected was that the union would negotiate conditions with Torside that would provide for a week's pay regardless of whether the man was employed or not, that there would be a guarantee.
Now, Mr. Wheeler, sometime in your earlier evidence you said that Torside was not acceptable to the shop stewards. Well, why do you think that was the case? Why did you make that statement?
I never made that statement.
Sorry, I thought somebody made it. I beg your pardon, it was you, Mr. Furlong, made the statement. Why did you...
Mr. Cliff, to be honest.
Mr. Cliff, sorry. Why did you make that statement?
Because the work that Torside were involved on had some of the work that they did, where it was for Mersey Docks, or companies that we had an interest in, had previously been worked by Mersey Docks' own employees, either directly when we had our own general cargo area, or when the men were transferred to Liverpool Cargo Handling, and they didn't accept that conditions could change if the men changed.
So just one last point. This dispute's been going on some time now. if it's not resolved in some way, who do you think are going to be the main people to lose?
Can I answer that question, sir? I think all parties involved will lose, but the major portion that's going to lose it is actually Merseyside as a whole. As I've said, the port is working normally. On the other hand, we have made, as I said, we've submitted in our evidence, and we'll try again tomorrow, to reach a reasonable settlement. But it takes two sides to reach a reasonable settlement, sir.
Thank you.
Who are PDP services?
PDP are a labour contractor that we have used to service our break bulk areas of operation, timber terminal, since the dismissal of the dockers. They employ men on temporary contracts. That's acknowledged. But the reason that we have maintained that position is that it leaves us with the option of offering jobs as part of this settlement. If we made them permanent, there would be no jobs to offer. The 40 jobs that we have offered as part of the offer that sits on the table at the moment is to replace those men, those PDP men.
And you know about the PDP contract, of which I have a copy here. If I could repeat what I said earlier. The worker is not entitled to secure payment from the contractor for holidays or absence due to sickness until a 12-week period from signing has elapsed. There's no obligation on the contractor to provide the worker with a guaranteed number of working hours in any day or week, and the worker acknowledges that the nature of the contractor's business may mean that there will be periods when no work is available, and there's more. Is not that a pretty good definition of casual labour?
It's not a contract of employment that we would operate ourselves. That's certainly the case. I don't know that it constitutes casual labour. The terms and conditions may not be of the nature that we want. But as I said to you, it's a position that is temporary, one that we feel is forced on us for the time being, and leaves us an option to be able to offer some jobs.
And you've never used PDP on any other occasion in any other place? PDP
started working the port in the middle of October. They never had any involvement with the port before that.
Is casual labour used in Medway Port, as has been suggested?
No, contract labour is used in Medway Port.
Contract labour such as PDP contract labour?
No, PDP are not employed in Medway Port. The situation that Mersey Docks inherited when it acquired the port was one where the dock workers were no longer directly employed by the port, but had set up their own cooperative arrangements, and
under some pressure.
Those are the two companies that still, the former registered dock workers there, still continue to work there under those arrangements.
Nelson Freight?
Nelson Freight is... Sorry, I don't understand what the question is about, Nelson Freight.
Well, do you use Nelson Freight?
Nelson Freight is a company that we have a 50% interest in.
So you're half owners of Nelson Freight?
That's right.
And do they employ casual labour?
No, they employ permanently, before this dispute started, they employed permanent labour and toorside.
Now, would it be a fair statement? I think this is my last question, possibly for now, Chairman. Would it be a fair statement to say that yes, MDHC doesn't employ labour except on MDHC approved conditions of service negotiated with the Transport and General Workers Union, presumably, but that it has no compunction about using labour on worsening conditions of service as long as that labour is provided by agencies?
No, that wouldn't be fair to say. The operations that Mersey Docks controls 100% are negotiated with the Transport and General Workers Union. The conditions are not standard. Different rates of pay, different working systems, different other conditions apply at each of the separate terminals. They're negotiated to meet the requirements of the customers and the way in which the work arises at each of those terminals. We have become involved in other ventures sharing the risk, where we appoint managers to run the companies. We're involved as directors. Merseydocs is involved as a director. The managers organise and run the companies themselves, negotiating the appropriate terms and conditions of employment with the union for that particular company based on the customers, the revenues that they're able to earn, the regularity of the work and so forth.
Sometimes better than MDHC terms?
I haven't done a case-by-case
Sometimes
comparison.
worse?
Different. Could be better, could be worse.
Just one very quick one. This PDP services, do you own them or have any financial interest in them, or are they wholly separate from your company?
We have no financial interest. They are simply contractors who we pay a rate per hour to for the labour that we employ.
So the statement in the case from the sacked dock workers that in fact it's that you own it, in fact is false. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely and totally.
Thank you.
Drake International, Chairman, who are they and what's their status at the moment?
They're an independent company totally, so we have no interest in that.
They are a subsidiary of Drake International, I think, their services. They're a facilities management company. They operate in the as well as in Liverpool, the container terminal in Southampton.
Do you have any knowledge at all about where they recruit their personnel from?
Well, we know where they did come from. It was Merseyside. They're all local people.
All local people?
Yes.
One of the, as I say, it's the first occasion we've had as a committee to look at the case presented by the sacked former employees of Mersey Dock and Harbour Company, and you'll know because you'll have seen it inside there. There's lots of letters of support. Does it not bother you that the Pope's aware of what's going on?
Yes, sir. I mean, I don't think it's other than true to say that when the dispute started, there was a considerable public support in Liverpool. I would suggest to you, sir, that was based on misinformation. And as it's become clear that we are prepared to negotiate, I would suggest, but I have to say, sir, this is a matter of opinion, not of fact, that the pendulum has begun to swing.
But you're not suggesting that you're simply sitting there waiting on the pendulum swinging?
No, sir. We have made, as you see from our evidence, we've made repeated efforts to resolve this for the reasons which I've given, and we will try again tomorrow.
The actual
bridge is broken. The church leaders who apparently gave their support in the early stages actually attended a mass meeting of the sacked dockers to recommend that they accept the offer that was negotiated between the company and the Transport and General Workers Union. There have been 2 editorials in the local paper which has been, let's say, sympathetic towards the case of the dockers in recent weeks, saying now is the time to settle and accept the offer.
Hopefully tomorrow you'll be able to make more progress, but just going back to the dispute itself and the action taken by you as a company, on the 29th of September, Friday night, you issued approximately 180 personal non-union contracts to ex-registered dockers employed at the container terminal. And as a result of that, I think we've got in our pack a letter from a Doreen McNally, who is not a disinterested party, but she is the wife of a docker. And I suppose it could be argued that some wives might be able to write, some partners might be able to write that letter anyway, you know, given the way in which the partners, you know, might sort of regard their work as being slightly more important in the family. But I mean, if what's in that letter is correct, it must be a pretty miserable existence being a docker, knowing that you can't go out of an evening. If you just let me finish, I'll let you come in, and perhaps have a few drinks and come back, and perhaps not know that you might have to be up on duty at 7 o'clock in the morning. I mean, there are certain jobs where people have to be on call and they're paid for being on call. I mean, does that letter bear any does it bear any likeness to the actual conditions which you were trying to place on these 180 personnel had they signed these contracts?
Mr. Chairman, so we replied at length, Mrs. McNally, and I would suggest that we table a copy of our reply and her letter and it be circulated to the committee. She also came to the annual general meeting of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company, Mr. Chairman, and if I may say so, I think the essence of her complaint was that her husband would be worse off under the new terms and conditions than he was under the old ones. That is a question of fact. And I happen to disagree with Mrs. McNally, but I said I was quite happy to sit down with her and go through it. But the original letter and our reply to it, we will circulate to the members of the committee.
You would certainly suggest that the contracts that you offered on the 29th of September didn't so substantially change the previous contracts of the then employees of Mersey Dock and Harbour Company, that they would feel quite rightly that they were being made an offer which they had to refuse.
The contract changed in one way only, and the point was picked up earlier on, which was that they were not collectively negotiated and represented contracts, they were individual contracts. And the reason for that was the problem that we had arises from unofficial elements not being prepared to work within the procedures agreed between the union and the company, ignoring both their responsibilities to the company and to the union and its officials. We couldn't, we didn't wish to simply restart work appearing to acknowledge that that system could continue to operate in that way. We made it clear to the Transport and General Workers Union through its full-time officials that we were not withdrawing recognition from the union, but we wanted to take time out so that we could, if we could get work started again, we would then discuss with them how representation issues would be dealt with for the future, and it was the intention to do that quickly.
I have here the response to Doreen McNally's letter, which presumably is Mr. Leatherborough's letter in the Echo. And when I read that letter in the Liverpool Echo, Mr. Leatherborough said that in 36 weeks, Mr. McNally worked 23 12-hour shifts. Only 4 occasions was one 12-hour shift followed by another 12-hour shift. Only 7 instances when he had less than a 12-hour break between shifts, and only 23 occasions when he was asked to report for work at a different time than originally specified. And only on one day throughout a short period of employment was he asked to come into work when he was scheduled to have a day off. We've had all that up, in fact. It comes to quite a formidable number of occasions when Mr. McNally's personal life was disrupted by the demands of the shift working that was required of him. That's a letter that's on POL2. POL1, is it? POL2.
Yeah. Sir Malcolm.
Can you tell me how many meetings you've had with the MEP for Liverpool?
We've had no meetings with the MEP for Liverpool.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Any points? Sir Furlow, can I thank you and your colleagues for coming along here. We would certainly hope that you try to go that extra yard, or perhaps even the extra mile if at all possible. The damage that's been done to not only your company itself and to the actual individuals who have been without employment since the strike in September 17 must be quite horrendous. Also, the damage that's been done to the port of Liverpool itself is something that obviously everyone must be concerned about. As I say, you're quite welcome to staying here. What the the representatives of the SAC workers say. And if there's anything else that you'd like to say to us, we'd quite welcome you to write to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add it takes two sides to reach a reasonable agreement?
Thank you.
There we go. There we go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nolan. I wonder if you could just, for the record, indicate who you have with you this afternoon and what their role was prior to being sacked, assuming that they're all sacked former employees.
Well, we have Mike Carton. Mike is a member of our General Executive Council of the Transport and General Workers Union.
Was Mike one of the individuals who was sacked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we've all been dismissed.
You've all been
dismissed. Jimmy Davis. Jimmy's a member of our National Committee.
Yeah. Next to you, on your right hand.
He's also a trustees director of our pension fund. Now, Teddy T is one of the best negotiators I've ever known. He's done everything that was possible to resolve this problem in 1993 at Seacourt Container Area. And so if I may, Mr. Chairman, first, what I'd like to state very clearly is that Paul Works and the Port of Liverpool have made a tremendous contribution to the economy of the port and to the economy of the city. It's on record that over the years that we have made many lobbies, particularly Labour government and representatives, to put money into the port of Liverpool for better development. We've always continuously done that. I'd like to put it on record also is that the reason that we've got the main problem, or the problem that we're confronted with, is the non-implementation of the guarantees put forward by Norman Fowler in 1989 after the abolition of the scheme. I would also suggest very strongly is that in 1993, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company imposed an employment contract upon the labour force there, and if there was not acceptable, then those men would have been made redundant within 90 days. I'd also say that Torside or any other employment agency did not abide by the guarantees put forward by Norman Fowler. The submission that we have put forward obviously is a chronological account of what has taken place over the past number of years, and obviously the representatives alongside myself will do our best to answer any questions put forward in a quite honest way.
I can say just a couple of things to say. It would help the members of the committee. The acoustics are not very good. If everyone could speak up, it's not quite a union meeting, but if you just raise your voices slightly, it's easier to... The other thing is that I would ask you not to use initials, because you all know what all these initials mean, but we might not ourselves immediately recognise them. And for the record, it might be a bit difficult for the stenographers as well to recognise them. So we'd appreciate if you're talking about something, you try, even if you find yourself using initials, you then quickly tell us what the initials actually represent. Could I just ask you a couple of questions to start off with? First of all, could I just say that it's, as I said earlier, it's the first time I saw your case presented in a factual, chronological manner. And I think you've done yourself some good in doing it, in presenting it this way, because it was quite difficult with all the bits of paper you were sending out to actually appreciate if there was a case there at all. I'm not suggesting that there is or is not a case, I'm just simply saying it was quite difficult to actually understand where the dispute started and what efforts had been made by either side or all partners to the dispute, or people who might feel themselves to be partners to the dispute or include in the dispute how it might be resolved. So in that sense, I think you've done yourself some good in doing that. But the next thing is that given the time that's now elapsed, the fact that the port hasn't stopped, it seems to be carrying on. You may wish to sort of disagree, and you wish to say just how, or whether it is competitive or not, whether it's maintaining its efficiency, but it still seems to be operating reasonably at a reasonable level. And given that there does seem to be still a feeling of hostility between yourselves and your former employers, if they were initially your employers, could I also just ask, just for the record, were any of you four employed by Torside?
No, not actually employed by Torside, but Torside used to supplement labour. So the general cargo area of the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, where I actually worked.
Right. But were any of the four of you who were sitting there, were you employed by Torside?
No.
No.
No. So you were all former employees of Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Could you just also, just for the record, just tell us just the length of service each of you has as a docker?
Yeah, Terry Teague, 29 years within the dock industry, 16 of those years with the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company.
Yeah, 36 years, started in 1960, age 18, worked for the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company.
32 years, started in 1964.
26 years, started with the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company.
Just before I open up to my colleagues, you must be aware of the attempts that have been made by the Transport and General Workers Union to reach some form of compromise. Do you think that you could go back and work for the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company?
Yes, we're very confident that we can go back to work for the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. With regards to the Transport and General Workers Union, the union's done everything that is possible over a very difficult period to try and resolve the problem. But unfortunately, each and every time we move with the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, they make it very clear they're not prepared to reinstate all those who've been dismissed.
If they were to re-employ you, would it mean that they'd have to pay some other person off?
Pay some?
Would it, if they were to re-employ
No.
you and your colleagues, would it mean that they would have to pay some other person who's presently employed in the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company off?
Now, the contracts with Drake International who they've got now, we believe are only short term. And as Mr. Cliff explained to you before, the PDP situation is only an interim arrangement with PDP to cover the loss of our labour being inside the general cargo area. So there wouldn't be a problem about paying anybody off.
Okay. Some often thought.
Mr. Nolan, you said in your opening remarks that this dispute is actually about the failure to deliver the guarantees given by Norman Fowler in the debate which took place on the abolition of the National Dock Labour Scheme. Perhaps you'd just like to tell the committee what those guarantees were and where you feel that they have not been honoured.
Well, reading Hansard during the period when the bill was going through Parliament for the abolition of the National Dock Labour Board, there's various questions put forward by many MPs, and Norman Fowler on quite a number of occasions gave guarantees that there would be no return back to casual part-time labour. There's also been no erosion of paying conditions, and definitely there will be no erosion of pension benefits. So if we examine that specific thing, what Norman Fowler was actually quoting in 1989, and I look what has happened in the port of Liverpool, I would state very clearly to you that even registered dock workers, since they've been employed by the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, and since 1993, have actually seen a reduction in their pension contributions, and also which means that it's a reduction in pension benefits. Also, the question of Torside, PDP, or Drake International, even though I may disagree with that labour being employed within the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, you'll be rest assured that they don't pay pension contributions, they're not entitled to a pension benefit, they're not entitled to sick pay. So I would say is that the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company are in breach of not implementing Norman Fowler's guarantees in 89.
I well remember the debate that took place because I was in the House at the time, and I'm sure you're well aware that my association with the Port of Liverpool goes back to 1955. We heard from Mr. Bradley the terms and conditions under which registered dock workers would be employed by Torside. He talked about 40 hours and 20 hours respectively. It seems to me that in reading through the evidence that has been submitted by yourselves and indeed by the dock company as well as by Torside too, and much of the comment that has taken place about this relates to the definition of what is or is not casual labour. Can I make it quite clear to you, Mr. Nolan, that at the time, as I made it clear to Norman Fowler, that one would not wish to see any return whatsoever to those appalling days which disfigured so many ports in this country, not least Liverpool. And I would like to make that position quite clear. I too share the concern of everybody to see that the Port of Liverpool is highly successful and can contribute to the economy of Merseyside, which benefits us all. So I believe it does turn on this issue of casualisation. And I would like to hear from you why you feel that the sort of contract which was on offer from a company such as Torside represents casualisation on this single issue. And I have no hidden agenda behind that. I think it is very fundamental to this debate as to how we define what is or is not casual labour as far as dock workers are concerned.
There's no problem. The question of definition of casual labour goes beyond saying it's a person who is paid so much money in his hand and he leaves at possibly 10 to 12 hours work. The question what you're putting forward regards to say Torside, you're saying that it's not casual labour. What I'm saying very clearly is, once again, Norman Fowler, he made the position very clear, is that there'd be no such thing as that type of employment, not just in the port of Liverpool, but any other port in this country. I listened very carefully to Mr. Furlong and Mr. Cliff over the past number of years. And I listened to Mr. Cliff say once again today that Torside is a completely independent company from the Merseyside Harbour Company. I think that the experience that you have in the port of Liverpool, both politically and economically, you should also stay clearly with me that as the port authority that actually does the business transactions with ship owners and port users. Bradley does not do any negotiations with regards to business transactions. So I would state very clearly that the Merseyside Harbour Company are directly involved with the employment of Torside in the port of Liverpool, and that Torside is only an independent, mythical type thing, if you with me. It's not in its correct reality. The top company are the people who negotiate the business transactions. So they should be allowed to concede X amounts of funding, say to Torside, for Torside to pay pension benefits and sick payments, which is never done.
I would accept that there are matters which need to be negotiated, but I still return to my central point that I think this definition of what is or is not casual labour is one which quite clearly has to be resolved as the single major issue. We can all have our views on whether or not the abolition of the dock labour scheme was a good thing or a bad thing, and I suggest that you and I would probably disagree on that point of view. But it doesn't alter the fact that there are things that have to flow as a result of that.
No, it's completely defined with the abolition of the National Dock Labour Board in 1989. And that states very clearly what the definition of casualisation is.
And therefore, at the end of the day, it must turn.
We abided by the guarantees that was put forward at the abolition of 1989.
It must turn, therefore, on the basis of whether what is on offer from Torside or indeed any other company that is offering to employ dock workers, whether or not that does constitute casual labour. And quite clearly you have one view, and both Mr. Bradley and the dock company have another. And obviously that is something we shall have to consider.
Yeah, see, Mr. Thornton, Sir Malcolm, the situation with regards to casual labour, I don't think there's any problem with our definition of casual labour, because like most of the people on this platform, my fathers were dock workers and we know the history of our own industry, no different than yourself. And so casual labour is quite simply labour that is employed from time to time when work's available, and the individual is only paid for that. So that's the definition of casual labour. The situation with regards to Torside is clearly Mr. Bradley is saying that he was an employer who permanently employed labour. But what Mr. Bradley didn't go on to develop, because it's like the dock company's submission, they go to a certain point in the debate and fail to develop the realities of it. Because Mr. Bradley's 80 Torside dock workers had an official trade union ballot in August 1995. Now, the substance of that ballot was that Torside as a company wished to get rid of 20 of the young Torside lads. Prior to this time, they were already employing casual dock workers, approximately 20 to 30. Now, casual in the sense that they were paid, whatever he's saying, 20 hours. They were casual. That's in our definition of casual. They were the ones who were casual. The 20 people that Mr. Bradley wants to sack from Torside, when they had the official trade union legal ballot, he wanted to offer them casual employment. His words, his terminology. In Birkenhead, in the Port of Liverpool, practically all the work, all the dock work in Birkenhead is casual. And by casual I mean when there's no ship in there, there's no dock workers, and when a ship comes in, there's dock workers. And the companies that operate in Birkenhead, most of them, and this is like the real crux of our problem in terms of whether we can have a legal ballot or not have a legal ballot, or who's casual and who isn't casual, and how clean the dock company's hands. The problem is the dock company has total control over everything that happens in the Port of Liverpool. They have shares in so many companies. Stanton Grove, for example, a company that operates in Birkenhead. Casual labour. Birkenhead Stevedore, casual labour. Now the directors of Birkenhead Stevedore, you'll find, are also either senior management or former management or even directors of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. Now, just to finish off, Mike, and just admit to a failing in our documents, and I'm sure people will say there's numerous failings. We've tried to identify the breakdown of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company, and it is a little bit misleading where we put the owner as the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. For example, Mersey Docks and Harbour Company don't own PDP, you do not own Drake Port Services, but they're using them, they employ them as agency, and PDP are a solely casual employment agency. Drake Port Services, in the initial weeks of this dispute, when Drake were used, they were essentially casual and essentially being brought in from the Medway ports, and it's more than disingenuous of Mr. Cliff to suggest for 1 minute that the labour in the Medway ports, which the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company acquired in 1993, is anywhere in any semblance permanent labour. It's all casual labour, which was part of the original problem regarding the actual acquisition and the imposition of contracts at the Medway ports, which in our opinion is very similar to the situation that we found ourselves in with the imposition of the contracts at Seaforth Container Base in 1994, in terms of the 90 days notice that Jimmy referred to, in terms of our jobs being advertised in the paper, not because we were on strike, not because we were in dispute, not because for any other reason, then we wouldn't agree in a collective bargain situation with the employer's argument regarding annualised hours, wage reductions, lengthening the working week, the abolition of the weekend, giving time off when it suited, the casualisation of our own labour practices, in short, we thought it was. We felt it was anyway. So it's obviously a more complex picture, but rest assured that what the picture we're attempting to paint is one that the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company can certainly sit back and say, well, that's not me. But it is them, because as Jimmy said before, they're the main port authority. They control everything that goes into that port, and in that powerful position, they can decide that the whole of Birkenhead is casual, and then more and more of the Port of Liverpool is casualised. And that's been our fear since '89, and it's certainly been substantiated in what we consider to be the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company's construction of our dismissal, because you do not get almost 500 people, which the original figure was in September the 28th, 1995. You do not get that number of people giving up their livelihoods, many with 30 or 40 years service, giving up the pension rights, giving up everything they've worked for, and their fathers before them. Human beings do not give that up in any bizarre sense that the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company seemed about some militant plot, some extremist plot, people out of control. I'm on the senior committee of our union, the Transport and General, the General Executive. I've got a bigger constituency than many MPs have. My constituency is over 130,000 members in the whole of the North West region. I stand for election every 2 years, so I'm certainly not unelected. Jimmy Nolan the same, Terry Teague and Jimmy Davis, all members of senior constitutional committees of our union. The reason why the dock company refer to people who aren't quite shop stewards is because they not only wanted to determine who the shop stewards were, when they attempted to do that in form of an election, where they put an asterisk, where they got the union to put an asterisk against people's names who were standing election because they wouldn't sign the accreditation, then that's where you've got major problems. And I'll finish off fine by just simply saying that a company, and I think Mr. Jameson referred to before, a company with an industrial relations record that would shame even the most backward employer. The Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company haven't attempted in all the years, because they're going back to before, they can go back to before 1989. It appears that the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company have never wanted to solve their industrial relations problems. I believe that's the case, and I've been a shop steward for 20 years, and I believe the reason why they did that is because for certain reasons, political, economic, and for their own advancements, it suited them to have an element of conflict permeating the whole of the port so that they could achieve their ultimate goal. And I believe when the Torside situation unfolded, they saw their opportunity and took it and disgracefully sacked 500 dock workers. And I'm sorry for being so lengthy there, Gordon.
Well, it's entirely up to you how you use the time. Just for the record, could we actually turn to page 25 of your document, where it says the casual structure of Mersey Docks and Harbour Company, and it lists a succession of companies, and then it says owner, and on each and every occasion.
I know. Can I clarify?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Coastal Containers, solely owned by the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Euromar Stevedores, solely owned by the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Merlin Stevedores, that's correct. Birkenhead Stevedore, 33% shareholding, with one of the directors in that company, a former senior manager of the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Freeport Warehousing, 50% holding. Liverpool Cargo Handling, we believe that's 100% holding because the dockers who formed Liverpool Cargo Handling were actually transferred out of the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company to establish that company. And then, not so long ago, they were all transferred back into the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company because they wanted to leave that area empty so that Torside could manage it on the cheap labour that Torside provided for the company, along with the casuals that Torside provided. Stanton Grove, Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, 33% holding. Medway Ports, owned by the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Sheerness Produce, MDHC. Most of it's correct, with the exception of North Irish as an independent trader, I think, Jim. Pandora, again, an independent trader. Mersey Bulk Services, an involvement with the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Seaboard Limited, again, the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, that's a company they've given to one of their safety managers as a bonus, I should no doubt. Ileburn, again, an involvement with the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company. Torside Limited, well, obviously Mr. Bradley's made his point, but it's our view. When Mr. Cliff was proud to ring up Jimmy Nolan as chairman of the Merseyside Port Shop Stewards, when they were seeking our involvement in industrial relations and trying to solve problems, the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company were paramount in the formation of Torside Company. Drake Port Service and PDP, independent companies, wholly used by the Mersey-Docks and Harbour Company, so there are corrections.
Okay, thanks. Eddie O'Hara.
I'm grateful for that, because obviously that's in further extension of my question to Mr. Cliff on this, and that's useful clarification. But on a point of detail in all that, Mr. Cotton, I asked Mr. Cliff where Drake Port Services recruited the personnel from that are currently employing, and he said they're local labour. I thought I heard you suggesting that they weren't, in fact. Could you clarify that?
Well, they're actually recruited from anywhere. I mean, we have got a list of names. We bring them up on a weekly basis, a fortnightly basis, bring them up from London. bringing them up from Bristol, wherever they want to bring them.
So they're not local?
There is an element of local people, but they're far outweighed by the people that they bring in from outside.
Yeah.
Far outweighed by them.
Yeah.
And we can furnish the committee with a list of names if necessary.
Perhaps it's important, Chairman, to go right back to the beginning, if I could, because the Mersey and Harbour Company dockers came out on strike in support of the Torside strike, refusing to cross the picket line, as the Chairman has explained. I think it would be useful for us to have your view of why you think it is the final reason the Torside men walked off the ship.
Well, the main reason that the Torside Labour walked off the ship is because there's two superintendents of the Mersey and Harbour Company who asked in the first place would that labour work overtime after 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. The only question that the Labour force asked was would they be paid the appropriate rate of overtime if they weren't overtime. The two superintendents of the Mersey and Harbour Company said, no, you will not be paid the appropriate rate of overtime rate. You'll be paid 1 hour's pay. Those young people then turned around and said, well, look, we don't wish to work overtime. We're going to knock off at 4 o'clock. They knocked off at 4 o'clock to go into the canteen to change from the working clothes into the civilian clothes. And whilst they was doing that, Bernie Bradley came into the office and sacked 5 of them. Now then, when Bernie Bradley sacked the 5 of them, those young people turned around and said, well, look, Mr. Bradley, we wish to go through union procedures, but we can't get in touch with the official, Mr. Jack Dempsey. But Mr. Bradley wasn't actually interested in that particular communication between himself and the Torside employers. And it became so serious that I got myself involved as the chairman of the Regional Docks and Waterways Committee. I phoned Bernie Bradley up that same evening, and I stated very clear to him, Bernard, why are you dismissing young people? If you've got a problem with the Mersey and Harbour Company with regards to the financial side of your operation, then don't be taking it out on Torside young people. And if we can contribute to help you or assist you in trying to get the Mersey and Harbour Company to fund more finances here, we will do that. Because we're rather disturbed that the Torside Labour is still in receipt of no pension benefits and they're in no receipt of any sick payments. Bernie Bradley assured me after approximately 2 hours discussion with him is that he'd be reinstating those like that Labour force. Unfortunately, the following morning the Labour force was not reinstated. He went back down the canteen and he dismissed 2 on this occasion. He said he re-employed 3, but he wanted to keep on to continue dismissing 2 people. Well, that wasn't acceptable. And so what do you do in a democratic society when you know that the Mersey and Harbour Company was directly involved in the dismissals in the first place by the 2 superintendents? What do you do when a young Labour force, who go in the name of Torside, tries to defend their own work friends for reinstatement? What we did then, by the way, Mr. Chairman and Eddie, we got in touch with the Mersey and Harbour Company. We had 3 shop stewards who actually met with Mr. Bernard Cliff and Mr. Price, who's an industrial relations officer at the MDHC, and they tried to persuade them to get involved with Bernie Bradley at Torside to get these young people reinstated. Bernard Cliff made it very clear at that meeting, and we have minutes of it, by the way. He made it very clear at that meeting that he was not getting involved. And if anybody who worked for the Mersey and Harbour Company refused to cross a picket line, they'll all be in breach of an employment contract and they'll all be dismissed. Now, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that that's like 20th century serfdom. When an employer who says that he's going to abide and he's going to support or recognise trades unionism, and at the same time, he has the audacity not to negotiate with the trades union representatives when they try to resolve the Torside situation. So we're saying very clearly, it was the Mersey and Harbour Company superintendents who refused to pay the appropriate overtime rate to those young people. That's how it began. And unfortunately, it developed from there, and we found ourselves in a position, because procedures, or trades union procedures, were not adopted, and we were not allowed to participate in any battles whatsoever, and we found ourselves in an unfortunate situation where we had in breach an employment contract, by the way. We don't deny that. But at the same time, I made it very clear is that the two superintendents of the MDHC created that situation in the first instance.
Could I just add to that? There's a flaw in the original number. There wasn't 5 involved, there was only 4. There was 4 lads who walked off the ship. Another lad who was involved, and he's been named in that, was actually not working at the ship. He was sitting in the canteen waiting for the lift home. He'd actually finished his day's work, and he worked over the other side of the water. He lived over the other side of the water in Birkenhead. Bernard Bradley summarily dismissed him. He didn't even know he was working. He thought he was with the 4 because he was sitting with them. And this lad was actually dismissed and had nothing to do with the initial action. So there was a flaw in the original argument of the 5 men.
So the strike happened, Chairman, and you've indicated yourself the difficulties of men like yourselves coming across a picket line and seeing your relatives on that picket line. And Mr. Cliff said maybe 10%.
My son was one
of you involved. Now, no one knows better than you how to feel. My own view is if I were walking to work with my mate and my mate said, that's my son on the picket line, I'd be inclined to stand by my mate. But no one's better placed than you to comment on that particular situation.
Yeah, well, I've been a representative since 1967 for the Transport and General Workers Union, and I've always been democratically elected every 3 years within the part of Liverpool. And I was elected immediately to participate on the Joint Modernisation Committee in 1968. And whilst I was on that committee, we've done everything to advance the part of Liverpool economically for its own development. And obviously we pursued, and we are guilty, we pursued an advancement in the industrial quality of life of all poor workers. And so that type of experience and coming right forward to 1971, if you recall, I'm referring to yourself there, Malcolm, if you recall, we worked a 10-hour day prior to 1971, and that was obnoxious. But on a joint basis between the port employers and the Transport and General Workers Union, we removed that 10-hour day, and we established and conceded a 24-hour coverage to port users and ship owners. And that 24 hours coverage was predominantly days and evening, Monday to Friday days. Evening was 5 to 11, Monday to Friday. And if employers wanted anybody to work overtime, particularly the weekend, then obviously you're earning themselves to an extra payment. And when we considered that agreement to the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company and other poor users, the ship owners were highly delighted. And there was no friction whatsoever. And every dock worker within that port abided by the agreements that were made by the Joint Modernisation Committee for one simple reason. They were actually involved in all the negotiations, indirectly. And as an example, we reported back to the full stewards as a modernisation committee. The no shop stewards reported back to all the independent companies that existed in the port. And every detail of any agreement or approaching agreements was actually explained in detail at those mass meetings. And then we'd call for a port mass meeting, where every man had the right to put his hand up to say yes or no. And on many occasions, by the way, when we put recommendations forward, we got rejected. And I could quote the actual agreements that were rejected. But the point is this, on more occasions than the rejection, poor workers accepted the changes that were taking place. I could quote you an example that in 1968, possibly eve of new technology in the transport industry, in Liverpool we had 22,000 poor workers, a combination of between ourselves here, office side and resident dock workers. 22,000. And what do you think we have now? If you live to Bernard Cliff, we have 321 dock workers left. Now surely you must recognise that that must be a remarkable achievement with regards to the development of the economy of Liverpool and the economy of our city. So you would think that an employer would be satisfied that he's got this 24-hour coverage, the labour force being reduced dramatically. He's got a fast turnaround of shipping. He's got reduced numbers. But then he says, oh no, I'm not having that. I've abolished the National Dock Labour Board. I've got friends within the government, and I know that they'll close their eyes if I do varying things. And this is precisely what the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. And I'm saying very clearly, Chairman, I'm accusing this government of negligence, and I've actually not actually conspired with the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company, but I'm accusing them because one of our problems, or one of the aspects of our problem, is that they never implemented the 89 recommendations. If they would have done that, we wouldn't have been in this position. But following on what the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company's done, is that they met me and Jimmy Davis, who were two conveners at that given time. Because before Torside, the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company actually created a joint venture between Powell Dufferin and the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company. And we actually met one of the managing directors, a fellow called Tom Carmichael, who came into a meeting, and he only spoke to me and Jimmy as conveners in an informal way, but he was also indicating what his future policy would be with regards to a strategy of developing a joint venture, which we call it LCH. He stated very clearly at that time that he visualised a recruitment of permanent labour to come and work for the LCH. He also made it very clear that he wanted our cooperation with regards to making sure that that labour became highly skilled in the question of discharge loading ships, the type of jobs that you perform on the quayside, and also the question of driving the ferry mechanic equipment. We were made up, me and Jimmy, because we said to ourselves, well, look, the way things are in Liverpool, our city, there's a lot of unemployment. We can report back very confidently to the labour force of LCH and say we've made a breakthrough. We're going to see recruitment coming into the industry, even though we've seen thousands leaving through the abolition of the National Draft Labour Board and through compensation payments between the government and also port employers. We were actually made up. We kept on asking Mr. Clef, when is this recruitment going to take place? We've had informal meetings with you. We've had official reports back to the labour force. Everyone's always united. When is the recruitment going to take place, Mr. Bernard Clef? Oh, I can't inform you at this moment in time. But behind the scenery, him and other people, by the way, with Transport and General Workers Union, conspired behind our back because we knew nothing about Torside being set up in 1970-71. We knew nothing whatsoever about it. The first we knew about it had been through a National Jackson Waterways Committee. But when I came back from London into Liverpool, I got shown an advert. I was in the Liverpool Echo. I was advertising Torside. It was then that we convened a meeting in the evening, and we met with the district secretary at that time, and we asked him, was he aware of this company called Torside? He said very clearly, I know nothing about it. We said, so who is Torside? Because no one knew who it was. Who's the people who control us? Is it the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company? Is it Powell Dufferin? Or who is it? Now, we never found out, but a few days later, Bernie Bradley's name came to the front. Now, I know Bernie Bradley as an ex-resident South worker. And I also know him because he's not actually related to me, but he's related to cousins of mine, so I know him. And I know his family where they were bred up and brought up. And I know that they were educated where they were brought up. And I'm not accusing their family of any misdemeanours. But after listening to Bernard Bradley and his explanations to this committee, I think he's had to be insulting to himself, and he's been insulting to ourselves. But the point is this, Mr. Chairman. Bernard Cliff was involved in it. And as I say, trades union people, not us, but trades union people. Now, I would say to you that if you've done some research and examined the reasons why the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company sets up Torside, you will find that it's very simple arithmetic. What the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company was saying to this government, when the 3-year cycle was taking place because of compensation payments, the Mersey-Jackson Harbour Company wanted to remove us. Well, it was inevitable that we'd be removed. And at the same time, to other parts of this country, ex-residents of Wales were gradually being moved out. So the reason Bernard Cliff never brought in recruitments within the MDHC or the joint venture, the Liverpool Cargo Handling Company, the reason was very simple. He was informed by political people, and there's only politics stem from here. He was informed that he could not do it, because in the future, or the 3-year cycle, that if he attempted to remove any ex-resident workers, he would not be in receipt of the £10,000 was to come and consider with regards to the total compensation payments. That's why he's on that. And when we asked Tom Carmichael, why did he renege on the question of recruitment, on the question of apprenticeships, on the question of the labour being employed directly by the LCHs, he said, I can't respond to you, I know you are right, but it's impossible for me to respond. That's how Torside came about. Now, we had no part or parcel with regards to the negotiations as a committee, and a recognised committee. We had no part whatsoever with regards to the negotiations between Mr. Cliff Menzies, the Transport and General Workers Union, and whoever. We were not involved in those initial negotiations. If we would have known that them Torside people were being received the pension benefits and sick payments, we would have opposed them coming down in the first place. And so what I would say is that, to the Committee of Inquiry, is that this particular issue that we're confronted with, it's damaging the economy of our port, and it's also damaging the economy of our city. And I think that you, as an employment committee, and taking in consideration that as far as I'm concerned, and as far as we're concerned, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company are not only in breach of an employment contract, they're in breach of political legislation that stem from this House of Parliament. And if they can do that, then surely we, as citizens of this country, we can also start opposing legislation that's been passed in this House of Commons. So I think it's disgraceful, by the way, what's being said here.
Okay. We've got 6 minutes left. We have to, unfortunately, finish by 6 o'clock. Could I just try and listen to my colleagues? Could I just try and sort of find if there's some way in which the last message that you give, I'm not suggesting that that you in any way suggested you don't want to resolve the dispute, but if we could just leave on the record this last attempt by you, because you know there's a meeting tomorrow at ACAS. Will you be at ACAS tomorrow?
Yes.
There are 4 points put forward by the Transport and General Workers Union, which they say are the 4 core issues. If we just go through them fairly quickly, otherwise we won't have time, to find out whether there's at least any basis for some hope that perhaps tomorrow this could be resolved. An agreement to restore the Torside employees into employment. Do you think it's reasonable, given that Torside don't seem to have been operating as a company since the strike started, that could actually happen, that Torside employees could be restored into employment?
Yes, well, because once again, Mr. Chairman, see, as far as we understood at one given stage of our development, Torside went into liquidation, and we find that PDP is in operation. Now, the significant point is this: the areas where that labour is employed is a modern facility of the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. They bring ships into that area. They should have no right to employ agency labour directly to discharge and load their vessels. We see no problem. Torside should be employed directly by the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company. They are the port authority. They do the business transactions with ship owners and port users, and that's the reason why they should employ the labour directly.
The issue of Drake's involvement in the port, I mean, the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company said that they believed that that's an area that if there was some agreement, or at least it may have been used, it said that there's an area with some agreement, that could be an area where there could be employment. Is that your understanding? As far as Drake are concerned, the issue of Drake's involvement in the port.
Well, initially, when we negotiated with the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company, they indicated to us that if and when our reinstatement took place, Drake would be removed from the port. There wouldn't be a problem with.
So that's how you see that being resolved. Yeah. The number of jobs that would be available. What figure? I appreciate that we're not negotiating and we're not ACAS, and I appreciate that every job is absolutely paramount. The number of jobs would be available is obviously very important, and you might not want to say anything about that. That's perhaps unfair of me. The financial package for those who may not wish to return to employment. Do you think it's the financial package that's been offered by the Mersey Dock and Harbour Company is a reasonable financial package? As far as I understand it, it's £25,000 to a number of employees.
Well, I'll try to respond to the question this way, Mr. Chairman. See, ever since the development of containerisation in early 71, the Transport and General Workers Union and the other unions have never been in opposition to the excess that top workers leaving to put us on severance payments or compensation payments. If we were reinstated about a Mersey Jackson Harbour Company, as it is today, tomorrow's meeting with ACAS, and if top workers wish to leave the industry on severance payments of £25,000 or any other figure, then we adopt the same principle as we've always adopted, is that it'll be on a voluntary basis and the man will have the right to leave or remain.
Okay. Any other questions? Can I then, on behalf of the committee, thank you for coming along and wish you all the best tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.